Thank you, Jenny. I have got 5 C's, and the mathematically minded amongst you would have already worked out that means I've got 2 minutes a C. I'm speaking for 10 minutes I've been given, which means right from the get-go we're not going to be able to delve deeply into the theological issues that are in this passage. And sometimes that concerns me because I think we bypass them altogether because they're familiar stories and we read and hear them like stories. But right from the beginning, this the first C I would just want to draw your attention to is the controversy that is in this passage. This passage theologically links sin and sickness together. And in 2 minutes, I can't even begin to unpack that theology. But I want to just help us to be aware of the fact that in Jewish thought, there was no question that sickness was linked to sin in the day when this was written. That was their firm belief, and the Talmud has an expression, no man can be healed until all his sins are forgiven. For us today, I think it's suffice to be aware that if man had not sinned in the first place, there would be no sickness. We would still be living in perfection in the Garden of Eden. And so in this passage, there's no specific link between what sin creates what sickness. That's not what the thought or the theology is around. A specific sin is not causing a specific sickness. The understanding is that we are broken people that live in a broken world, and part of that brokenness is sickness and disease. And that's why I think this passage is here, because Christ came to reveal to the world that there is a place of reconciliation, of restoration. Salvation is about wholeness in our spirit, our soul, and our body. And I'll unpack a little bit more in a couple of the other points, because this passage also has a continuation, a clarification, and a confrontation. But the first thing I want us to do is, so I wonder if you would all just close your eyes for me, please. And I want you to locate yourself in this very familiar passage rather than it being about others. So picture the scene. It's a really hot, sticky Middle Eastern day. The crowds have absolutely rammed not only the outside of the house, but the inside of the house, where they find Jesus, who has been strangely absent for them for a few days. So you've gone with the crowd, with the whole village, you've thronged to this home to see what is he going to do next. I wonder, where do you find yourself? Have you managed to get inside the house very close? Or are you outside, frustrated, the flies getting on your nerves? Feeling the heat of the sun and all the pleasant and not so pleasant smells that are floating on the afternoon breeze. And then you hear a real commotion and people pushing and barging from behind, and you're getting shoved even tighter together, squashed. And the shoving eases a little bit, enough for you to be able to turn your head and see what's going on, just as you see 4 people carrying someone on what looks like a homemade stretcher up on the roof, up the outside stairs onto the roof. There's a murmuring, rippling through the crowd. People are starting to say that roof's never going to hold all them. It's only made of twigs and straw. But they get onto the roof successfully, and the ripple of murmuring is inside the house now, as people inside who can't see are wanting to know what's going on, when all of a sudden they're bombarded with twigs and branches and leaves and mud falling in as someone digs their way through the roof above you. So the people inside the house are frustrated now, mud landing on their head. And the paralysed man is lowered down. And while the crowd are pushing and murmuring and all sharing quietly their own opinions with the people around them, Jesus just immediately has compassion on this man and says to him, "Your sins are forgiven." And the tension and the atmosphere changes. Sharp intake of breath from the religious leaders and everyone else wondering what they're going to say. Is this blasphemy? And the confrontation ensues as Jesus reads the room and addresses directly the questions that are rippling through people's minds. You might not be able to hear the whole conversation. Did he forgive that man's sin? How do we know? What was his sin? Is his sin causing his sickness? What's going on? How can anyone prove that anyway? When suddenly the crowd pushes again, but this time backwards, almost stumbling over one another, and a gap begins to part as the once paralysed man gets up, this time dragging his bed behind him, and just boldly walks through that crowd, all heads turning to follow him. Maybe this man Jesus does have the authority to forgive sins after all. So you're free to open your eyes now. I wonder, just, you don't have to tell anyone. You can share in the groups when you go into groups if you want to, but I want you to just be aware, where did you locate yourself in that story? Are you stuck on the controversy of the theology that's behind this issue? Has it raised questions in your own thinking? Were you inside rejoicing at the healing that you saw? Were you outside frustrated because you couldn't get any closer? Were you one of the religious leaders that couldn't cope with what was unfolding before you because it was so different to what your own understanding was? So let's just look at this continuation of healing. Mark started his book for us, chapter 1, right from the beginning, showing us that Jesus can deliver people from demons that oppress their life, that he can heal anyone that's brought to him of any sickness. And here we have this continuation of Jesus coming to preach, but ending up being mobbed by people who want healing and deliverance. And he continues to respond to people's faith. when they come to him asking, like the leper did, if you want to heal me, I will be healed. And Jesus straight away said, I do want to heal you, reaching out and touching the man. Who would touch a leper? Nobody. But Jesus reached out and touched him to show that leprosy was not going to contaminate Jesus. Jesus was going to make clean what was unclean. And he does it again here in a different way. But this time he goes a step further. He doesn't just simply say to the man, get up, take your mat and walk. He doesn't simply deal with the physical symptoms that the man presents himself with, but he goes to the root of the problem of mankind, our sin. And Jesus says to him, let me forgive your sins. Your sins are forgiven. Because he's showing us that he's come not just to be a wonder worker. He's not just a miracle worker. He's not just a witch doctor that people can go to with various ailments, but he's come to reconcile the whole world to the living God, to himself, the man's sin. Salvation is wholeness in every area of our life, isn't it? And he responds to the faith that he sees. The passage says Jesus saw their faith. And that fascinated me because I think we think about faith as an internal, personal thing, don't we? But their faith was expressed by all the people that went to see Jesus. The men that carried the friend up onto the roof and they didn't take no for an answer. They found a way to connect with Jesus. And the man himself, I think he often gets a bad rap. I've often heard people say the paralysed man didn't have faith of his own, only his friends had faith. I don't read that in this passage at all. Who doesn't know that maybe the paralysed man begged his friends, please, I can't get there on my own, but I know this man can make a difference in my life. Will you help me? And he most definitely responds with obedient faith, because the minute Jesus says to him, pick up your mat and walk, despite understanding that he hasn't been able to for years, he gets up and he does what he's told and he goes home, dragging his mat behind him. We see faith in action in this passage. And I even want to suggest maybe the religious leaders had originally gone there in faith. They were believers. They believed in God. They believed as much as they had understanding at the time. And Jesus was coming with new authority that they had never seen before, but it shocked them to their core and it frightened them. They didn't want to be blasphemous. They didn't understand what he was saying because they knew they don't have the power to forgive sin. Priests do not have the power to forgive sin. The priests can only declare clean something that has already been made clean. But here was Jesus making clean. So he brings this clarification. I'm not here just to do miracles for you lot. I'm here to bring salvation to the whole world. And this results in the confrontation. The religious leaders are so disturbed by Jesus' authority. And I wonder why. Like I just said, I think they have their faith. They have faith. They're believers. They believe in God. They believe in Jewish tradition and Jewish law and Jewish principle. But they were so narrow in and trapped by their own thinking, their own understanding. They were not open to what Jesus had come to show and to reveal to them. And so this confrontation ensues. So as we go into groups, I want you to think about this continuation of the healings that Jesus brought, but that he extends for us to understand that the life that he gives us is deeper than just our body. He brings wholeness to every aspect of our life. He clarifies that he is God in this passage. Arises out of what was the religious leader's own understanding. And so as I send you into groups, I want you to answer the questions. How can we express our faith in a visible way today? I'll put them in the chat. How can we express our faith in a visible way today? Like the paralysed man and his friends express their faith. People in the crowd are expressing their faith. How can we make our faith visible so that in a world of lockdown and restriction, other people can see our faith? And if we do that, what opposition might we encounter and need to be prepared for in our society today?